The tall man is standing, looking at something far off, totally absorbed. As the witness approaches, the tall man slowly begins to fade into nothingness, as if he was never there to begin with. This account of a phantom in Kenley was witnessed by author Andrew Cole, who penned an essay on the experience which was featured in issue 4 of the Strange Times magazine. Kenley, a small town in Surrey, England, is probably most famous for being the birthplace of late actor Peter Cushing. In the 1960s and 70s, Cushing appeared in countless Hammer horror films, and, like a scene out of one of his films, Cole's experience took place on a dark and cloudy, overcast night. Walking home from visiting friends, Cole, a resident of Kenley for over 11 years, recalls when he first spotted the strange fellow. Nearing my home, I approached Hayes Lane, which crosses over the railway tracks near Kenley Station. Walking across the bridge was a tall, elderly man, slightly bent forward, and dressed in old-fashioned clothing, which looked to me as if it belonged to an era like the 1930s. Apart from his attire, the stranger looked perfectly normal, and there was nothing else that really caught my interest. Anyway, once the man had crossed the bridge, he turned left towards the railway station and unexpectedly stopped. For whatever reason, this sudden action caught Cole's attention, and he began to watch him with growing curiosity. The tall man seemed to be staring vacantly at something in the far distance, and I continued to walk towards him until I was no more than a few feet away. Suddenly, to my astonishment, the man began to dissolve into thin air. I could not believe what was happening as he simply faded away. Within the space of about 5 seconds, he had disappeared without a trace. Cole claims his heart was racing as he stood attempting to make sense of what he had just seen. The situation was straight out of the X-Files. What had taken place seemed totally impossible, and I realized that I had been deeply shocked by this. Then I briefly wondered if the man had fallen into some unseen opening. But it was obvious there was nowhere he could have gone. I stood there for a moment, totally stunned. Let me add that I had no particular interest in the paranormal at this time, nor had I been drinking or taking any kind of medication that would have caused me to hallucinate. Despite all my best efforts, I have been unable to find any rational explanation for what happened. I am now convinced that I encountered a genuine ghost, or let's say I experienced something that does not fit in with our comfortable view of the everyday world. Cole spent many long hours researching the history of the area in hopes of finding out if this figure had been sighted by others over the years. My historical research efforts since this event have led me to believe that I may have seen the Phantom Groomsman. I am not the only individual in Kenley to have encountered this ghostly figure, who is said to have trained and bred foxhounds at the local manor house, which was demolished many years ago. If it was the notorious Phantom Groomsman, there is no explanation for why he should haunt the Kenley area, and my brief impression of the man suggested he was a contented individual. Cole was somewhat surprised to learn that Kenley was home to numerous other phantoms, including a World War II RAF pilot who apparently haunts the old local aerodrome and is said to occasionally dash in front of approaching cars. Another phantom includes a nun, also reported as a woman holding a young child, who is in search of the village of Wattenden, which no longer exists. It should be noted that Kenley was formerly known as Wattenden, and that most of its population died due to the Black Death. The bodies were burnt and the remains ended up in a huge plague pit. It seems where it goes tragedy, the paranormal usually follows. Appearing in the January 14, 1966 issue of the Southampton Evening Echo, is a bizarre story involving a police officer who alleges that just 3 years earlier, he somehow managed to capture a UFO. Inspired by journalist Peter Chislett's January 11, 1966 UFO article in The Echo titled The Thing, ex-police officer K.E. Apothecary decided to write to the Southampton-based newspaper regarding a strange experience he had in the summer of 1963. He had been reluctant to tell anyone his story for fear they would think he was crazy. I was a police constable stationed at Netley Abbey. I had finished my tour of duty and was cycling home. The time was about 2 a.m. As I neared Netley railway station, I saw in the sky about 100 yards in front of me a large orange-red colored ball, about 4 feet in diameter. The object came slowly to earth and landed in the railway goods yard. I quickly took cover behind some nearby buildings and kept the object under close observation. It did not move or make any sound, but made an awesome sight. Apothecary claims he stood watching the landed object for several minutes. He eventually approached it and began to examine it up close. He had no idea what it was, and that didn't sit well with him. He decided that he needed to try and retrieve it and bring it back to the Netley police station so that further inquiries could be made. I managed to lift the thing, it was not very heavy, and placed it on the saddle of my cycle. So with one hand on top and the other steering my cycle, walking along, I made my way back to the station with my find. Apothecary found it difficult to explain what happened next, other than it was something very, very strange. I noticed that with each step I took, the thing appeared to decrease in size, and by the time I got to Netley police station, it had completely disappeared. Do you wonder why I never tell anyone? I have heard of people touching UFOs, the most famous case being the Stefan Michalak Falcon Lake encounter. But this is the first time I've ever heard of a person actually managing to grab and carry one. Usually accounts involving people who touch UFOs end badly, with the person winding up in a hospital bed with severe burns or worse. Another interesting aspect of this story is the object seemed to decrease in size the closer he got to the station, as if the object, or whomever was controlling it, was aware of what was happening and was quickly attempting to get rid of the evidence. 2 a.m., 2017, Taylor, Florida. A man returning home from a night out visiting friends encounters something not of this world. His way home, a road nicknamed Snake Road by the locals, was known for being twisty and hard to manage in the daytime. At night it was even worse thanks to the fact that there were no lights anywhere along that stretch of roadway. It was dark and isolated. As he navigated a right turn, doing somewhere between 45 and 50 miles per hour, the lights from his Nissan Sentra suddenly caught something up ahead. It was crouched on the side of the road in the grass, but not far from the pavement. It was hunched over and moving as if it were eating, or maybe digging. I'm not sure. But I was able to see another one farther down in the ditch as I passed by. The witness claims that the two creatures were human-like, with pinkish skin, long thin strands of hair on their bodies, not unlike unmanicured chest hair, and with huge beach ball-like heads. The heads were odd in that they were simply too big for the bodies attached to them. He found it curious that they never flinched, nor did they turn around to see where the light was coming from as he approached and passed. They just carried on with whatever it was they were doing. His brief sighting, lasting only 3 to 4 seconds, was seared into his memory. When he returned home, he immediately put pencil to paper and drew what he had seen. He noted that there had been sightings of a hairy cryptid referred to as the Taylor Wildman, but he doubted that this is what he saw. The Taylor Wildman was essentially a Bigfoot-like creature, and this thing he saw that night was no Bigfoot. The closest I ever found to this thing was a Demogorgon, from Stranger Things, he noted. Anyone who has an interest in cryptozoology will tell you that lurking in our world's forests and oceans are creatures unknown to science. The creatures witnessed and drew by this Taylor resident are definitely different. While the witness claimed that they were covered in hair, they did not appear to be hairy like a Sasquatch might be, and their head size, larger than their main bodies, is also abnormal, but not that different than some alien encounter cases in which witnesses describe seeing beings with heads much larger than their bodies. Granted, they could be some kind of deformed humans. I guess that's possible, but it still does not explain why they would be out in the middle of nowhere, along that side of the road in a wooded area in complete darkness, and apparently without clothes. And what exactly were they doing out there? Again, there are alien encounter cases which witnesses claim they observed beings digging or gathering samples in the forest, so I'm left to wonder, had this resident encountered not an unknown species of animal that night, but rather, as Fortean author John Keel would suggest, archaeologists from someplace else?